questions.
I just have a quick question. If we were able to get gloves, who needs them? Where do they need to go?
So I'm just speaking as more of a supply chain issue that we're seeing. So it would most likely be EMS and fire.
Okay.
But we're just seeing an extreme uptick on our end with all of our communities with requests on gloves. It seems to be a lack of supply out there, and also an increase in price that has never been seen before for a box of gloves. So.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? All right. Next on the agenda, I put a little PowerPoint presentation together. On exercise program. So I think most people probably have an exercise program, even if you don't really consider it an exercise program. Like if you're doing a fire drill, then that's really a more basic type of exercise. But an exercise program is an important part of your preparedness program. And I know we have a lot of different partners from different town departments, as well as our businesses in the community on this LEPC meeting, that if you, I feel would benefit from going deep into the process of building out an exercise program that actually works for you and can help you improve your planning and preparedness process. So the whole point of having an exercise program in the first place is to test your written plans and checklists. So to make sure that they actually work. If you are a tier 2 facility and you have your emergency plan for what's going to happen in the event of a hazardous materials leak, you have your plan, but you shouldn't be leaving your plan on the shelf hoping that it's entirely perfect. Your exercise programs through both discussion and functional based events are going to help you identify what assumptions in your plan maybe are false, or what's an important step in the response and recovery process that's not captured in your checklist, say. And on this screen, we can see, so your exercise cycle begins with the designing and development of your exercises, and then actually conducting and evaluating it, and then improving your plans and checklists that you exercise on the backside. But your exercises as a whole fit into the larger integrated preparedness cycle. So you obviously begin by organizing and equipping your team, your organization, and training them to do their jobs. And then your exercising is how you test, what other improvements need to be made in terms of planning, equipment, training needs. Is there something training needs that's, not being met? And, to take fire drills as an example, that's a way where you can both evaluate your organization's evacuation plan, as well as provide that training to get that muscle memory to your staff to know what exactly the route is that I'm going to leave the building and form up at, so that we can account for everyone in the building. So instead of having people leaving through every which way and you're not sure who's left inside the building. So like I said, any organization is not just for your emergency services department should be building at least a basic exercise program. I know most places, most organizations on the school have plans and checklists of some sort to varying degrees of complexity that need to be exercised to help ensure that those plans both work and that, that everyone knows what they're doing and that you're not there, and to identify room for improvement. Like I said on the screen, it validates the effectiveness of your plans. So you don't want to have a plan that's just good in theory and wait for an emergency to happen to be the first time to try it out. So again, using a tier 2 facility as an example, there's going to be a long line of phone numbers that you're going to need to call to report hazardous materials release. So does your staff actually know what those numbers are? Are those numbers that you have in your plan still valid? Those are all things that you can, if not in an exercise, like a functional exercise, having people pick up the phone and call. You could have a tabletop exercise and sort of talk through and use that as a training moment as well for your staff to make sure that they understand their role in an emergency. And exercises are really effective a way to improve your planning process and identify what assumptions you should be making for your planning and what assumptions you should not be making. So I have 3 examples listed on the screen. Obviously, because of COVID this year, the LEPC has kind of stepped back from the exercise program. But I've already talked with Dennis and Tim about where we want to start taking our exercises over the next year or two. And in the previous 2019 series of exercises that the LEPC hosted regarding the train that hit the truck releasing a hazmat incident. One of the things that came out of the after action reports for that was that we had the rave alert for the Alert Needham program, but there wasn't actually a standard operating procedure on how to actually implement that and alert the community. So out of that, a new checklist was developed with the SOPs for how the town's dispatchers or the public information officer or a variety of other town officials could actually activate the alert instead of everyone thinking, oh, that's someone else's job. That those exercises enabled the town to identify a gap in checklist and plan and to plan better for it. The MGH mass casualty planning. This was something that I came across in my, when I was writing my capstone for my master's, was that after the Aurora movie theater shooting in 2012, this is, less of an exercise, but more of a planning assumption. The University of Colorado conducted a analysis of that shooting to determine that a tier 1 trauma center could expect in the event of a mass casualty incident to receive 21 critical patients, I believe it was 21 critical patients in the first hour after the event happens. So taking that survey, Massachusetts General Hospital changed their planning assumptions to say, we will expect after a mass casualty incident to receive 21 people after the start in the first hour after a mass casualty incident. And actually, when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, MGH received exactly 21 patients in the first hour after the event. So that shows you how, when they're conducting their mass casualty exercises with a realistic planning assumption, that actually pays dividends in the end by having being able to test a realistic scenario. So that's one thing, if you're designing exercises, is to make them as realistic as possible, not to have a hurricane that causes a tornado that causes hazmat leak, and then also there's a suspicious package by the front door as well. That's a big flaw that a lot of exercises programs have. is that you're trying to do too much, but we'll go into it later, but you want to keep it sort of simple and very tailored to what you're trying to evaluate. And the last is another thing that I came across in my capstone for my master's was survey of Australian paramedics. And it was looking to determine would paramedics be willing to respond to a terrorist use of weapons of mass destruction. This was with one of the state so government ambulance services in Australia. And it was determined that one of the biggest factor that correlated most with a paramedic's willingness to respond to a terrorist WMD attack was actually having recently participated in an exercise about a WMD scenario. So having that experience and being able to work through what's would otherwise be a more scary and intimidating scenario, having to actually experience, oh, it's not that different from, say, another unintentional hazmat release, and getting that the faith in your procedures and your equipment and stuff is really helpful and useful for emergency responders in particular. So how to get started is basically you should identify what are your emergency plans. Your building should have some sort of a evacuation plan, basic for fire drills or, sheltering in place if you have to because of a storm or hazmat incident. And then do you have any other additional plans? We talked on the LEPC meeting a while ago about the flu clinics that Tiffany and Taylor did a great job putting on for the town, but that is also sort of functioned as an exercise to test the town's emergency dispensing plans. That has informed the health department's planning going into COVID vaccine distribution as that's becoming more and more real to us. So that having that experience is very useful for your planning assumptions. So you want your exercise program to be long-term and progressive. So the exercises should build off of each other. You shouldn't conduct one exercise and leave it alone. You should always be improving your plans between exercises. You shouldn't exercise, find the flaws in your plan, and then exercise that exact same plan again. You should give yourself a gap to be able to improve the plan and test the new improved plan later on. You also want to make the exercises more complex, and this is the little H-shape emblem that shows how you begin. So you begin with your seminars and workshops where you're really, that's if your organization doesn't have a plan or has a very outdated plan that needs to be updated. This is where you're going to begin by getting all the important stakeholders around the table and start talking about, what should the plan actually look like? What should it include? And then your tabletop exercise is where everyone gets around the table and you actually walk through the plan to meet, to have a scenario and walk through and say, this is my role, this plan says my organization or my team's going to do X, Y, and Z, but we don't have the capability to do Y. That's where you identify those stuff. Then drills and functional exercises are more testing specific functions. So like your fire drill is called fire drill for a reason, because you're testing one function, which is the ability to evacuate the building and, assemble together and get accountability. And the input for that is you have one input, which is pulling the fire alarm. And then your full scale exercise, it tests the whole response process from start to finish. So you as a school is not going to have a full scale exercise for a fire drill where you have the fire department show up and put out a fire that you start in your school. So you need to tailor these exercises to your needs, to your specific needs of your facility. And the last thing that anyone should be doing when they're starting an exercise program is beginning with a full scale exercise. You want to work your way up because it's much easier than you might think to identify flaws in your planning, in your procedures in the discussion based exercises. So you want to have smart exercise objectives. The SMART objectives, they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So you go using the fire drill as an example again, you want to be specific. I want 100% of the employees in my building to evacuate the building within 2 minutes of the fire alarm being pulled. That's very specific. It's measurable. You can measure, did 100% of people leave the building or not? It's time-based. In the specific time frame, is it realistic? I would think so, but maybe your exercise shows that it's not a realistic time frame, although you might have some troubles then. And is it achievable? And that's sort of, if you think your objectives are achievable and realistic, and they can't be achieved in the exercise, why is that? That's the sort of gap that you want to try and fill through better planning, better training, stuff like that. So yeah, that's how you identify your strengths and weaknesses. And again, there's a lot of talk with exercises about identifying your gaps and improvement planning, but they're also a way to identify what are you doing really well as well. And you don't want to overlook your strengths and assume that your strengths just happened by luck, because they probably didn't. They were probably the result of good training, organization, and planning. So when you're actually conducting an exercise, how you conduct it depends on the type of exercise. And obviously, as you move from discussion to functional exercises, they become more complex with a larger exercise team needed. So you should always identify key stakeholders anyways to begin your planning process. To plan, you should have at least three or four exercise planning meetings to identify what actually are your objectives, to design the scenario and make sure that all the organizations that are going to be participating, if you're using a multi-organizational exercise, are on the same page. If you're doing a discussion-based exercise, a tabletop exercise, you really just need like a PowerPoint slide going through your scenario, and you only you would need a facilitator for that exercise to sort of keep everyone on track and walk through the exercise, and maybe an evaluator to take notes on what everyone talks about. If you're going into a more functional exercise, though, you should have a safety officer to make sure that everyone's being safe. The exercise director to keep everyone on the same page. You can double up on these roles as well, but where you get to the big needs for people in a functional exercise are going to be your simulation cell and your controllers. these are the people that are going to make sure the simulations work, and they are going to hand injects into people. So if you're doing an active shooter exercise, you obviously don't want to start that off with a rail shooter. So you can have a controller with an inject, a piece of paper that can hand deliver to a player in the exercise saying, there's been a shooting, follow these procedures, whatever you have in place. Same for like a fire drill. You're not going to actually start a fire and wait for someone to see it to pull the fire alarm. You can hand them an injector, or that can be done, by the simulation cell, um, uh, to just pull the fire alarm and evaluate from there. And then your controllers can double up for evaluators as well. So your evaluators are going to have take notes in real time. And when you're evaluating an exercise, you should make sure that your evaluators are the subject matter experts um, for what they're evaluating. So if you're having a joint police and fire exercise, say, you don't want a firefighter being the one to evaluate the law enforcement response. If you're a tier 2 facility and you have, one person who leads your preparedness program and they're really on the ball, they should be the evaluator in the exercise. Probably not the player who's carrying out the exercise. And then immediately following the exercise, this is more for a functional exercise. Like I said, in a tabletop, you would take notes on the problems that arise as you go along. But you would want a hot wash to conduct an after action review with all the evaluators and maybe some of the key players as well, to identify what went wrong, what went right, while it's still fresh in everyone's mind. And then a point of contact should be identified, maybe the exercise director, depending on how big it is, to go back and compile an after action report so that you can actually capture what gaps were identified, how they're going to be fixed, who's going to fix them, who's going to write that new SOP, so we now know how to activate the rave alert system in town. All that can get captured in the rave and the after action review, after action report, and that allows you to track your improvements over time with your exercises so you can actually see that you are improving your procedures. And then this is the link to the prep toolkit from FEMA. HSEEP is the Homeland Security Exercise Evaluation Program. That's sort of like the standard exercise program. If you want to start your organization's exercise program, or you want to robust it, you can go to this link, and I'll send out this PowerPoint as well with the minutes. Or you can just Google HSEEP toolkit. It's the first thing that pulls up. This website has the HSEEP doctrine, which explains to you how to how to build an exercise program from bolts to nuts. But it also has templates for every sort of document you might need, from your events list to index to after action reports. It has template slides for how to do a tabletop exercise. So if you really don't know, where to start, this is a good place. And you just plug and play with the information that you want on these templates, and it's they did a good job at FEMA. It's really easy to use. So I know that was probably a lot as a very basic overview exercises, but I feel like especially for our community partners, but maybe even some of our other town departments might find it useful to, conduct a more robust exercise. And if you are conducting exercises now, to be able to better capture the lessons learned and take that forward, which is, I think, a big failing in a lot of exercise programs, is that you sort of just have the exercise and let it, and that's it. You don't actually improve your planning or your training or anything as a result of it. You sort of just check that box off as being done. So are there any questions or comments from the group? All right, next we have the emergency management updates. So we do have the EOC up and running in the town. For a couple months now, we're going to expand out the operations section as we move into the vaccine distribution to make sure that all the appropriate town departments are included in that planning process. So that'll be happening over the next month. Next week, Kim Donovan and I will be presenting at the select board on the hazard mitigation plan. So like I announced last month that was, it's currently approved pending adoption by FEMA. And so once the select board formally adopts that, the plan will be, we'll just submit that back up to FEMA and they'll fully approve the plan. I believe that's for 5 years. So in other updates, I am being deployed with the National Guard over to the Middle East in mid-January. So I do have to quarantine first before I go. So this will be my last week in the office. I will have access to my email. I will be checking it, I'll try to check it fairly regularly. And I will try and be at the next LAPC meeting because I will still be in quarantine at that time with nothing else to do. So if you need anything, you can still email me, but reach out to Dennis and Tim if you need any urgent emergency management information. I do have, I reached out to several people. So we have the LAPC agendas for the next 6 months are all squared away. We have a lot of good presenters coming on. Next month, we have Nick Child, who's the Chief Planning and Preparedness Officer for the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. So for any of our Tier 2 partners on the committee, I would highly recommend that you try to make that meeting, and that's going to be January 11th is the next LAPC meeting. Any questions or comments?
Michael, just on your deployment, we wish you the best of luck, and we want you back here as soon as possible because you're doing a great job. Good job on the presentation this morning. It was very informative. So on behalf of the fire department, in any event, we wish you the best in your deployment and get back here safely and quickly. Don't sign up for a double deployment, please.
You don't have to worry about that, Chief. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Does anyone have anything else?
Michael, Dave Davis, and I would just echo what the chief said, and I hope to see you back soon.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I hope to, I'm looking forward to getting back.
You haven't left yet.
I know. I just like it here so much.
Good.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know these meetings are always tough on Monday mornings, especially when it always seems to rain. Doesn't help But thank you guys for coming, and I hope you can take the presentation away and, make your organizations more prepared going forward. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Happy
Michael.
holidays.
Thank you.
Holidays, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.